Beloved, welcome back to episode 6 of Building Your Very Own Cozy Cabin DIY. Today we're going to take a little bit of a side quest. Some of our Zoomer brothers have asked me if I could go into a little bit of detail of my traditional carpentry tools, and we'll do that and then we'll put them to use on a real project. But first off, let me catch you up with what we did yesterday and then we'll get to work. Yesterday we found out that the big 400 amp service panel was much bigger than I anticipated, so we're going to have to let in one more crossbar in the traditional way. So let's go get our tools prepped and I'll go through the box and then we'll get going on the project. It seems to me for the coming struggle, Proho needs to have two sets of tools when it comes to carpentry. Your modern tools and a basic set of vintage tools. And the reason for this, well, I'll just give you an example. This framing slick is one of my prized possessions and it was hand forged in 1837. Is it still relevant and as functional as it ever was? Well, of course it is. Now, does that mean that I want to do my house remodel with traditional tools? Well, hats off to you. If you're the guy that can carry the full-size, full-frame 1911 around every day, you might be that guy. But for the rest of us, you use the resources at hand. But it's not a bad idea to have a basic understanding of how these tools operate. So that's where I'm at. I want to be sure and state that I'm not an expert at all with the things that I share with you. I am nothing more than an enthusiast, and we learn together with these things. I'm not super competent with all the tools in this grip, but I do have a basic understanding where if in a pinch, if I had to, I could build a basic structure or furniture, the things that my family would need with everything contained in this box. And that's the beauty of it. Old-time carpenters that would have showed up to build a magnificent timber frame structure would have had something very similar to this. All the tools that they need would fit into this because it was just different times. It's kind of funny when you contrast this with the big Wells cargo trailers that our modern contractors have to drag around, or big vans. You know, I'm not casting shade. I'm just pointing out that it's very different, very interesting. This grip is by no means the extent of the tools that I have, but what's kind of interesting about this is that I've always, over the years, I've taken out things that I didn't need. So what's left in here, what remains, is what's risen to the top, the cream of the crop. So all these things are important to me and things that I use regularly, and there's nothing in here that I don't use. So you can load up a box with all sorts of things to show off, but this is not that. This is just what works and what I actually use. So just very briefly, I'll go over the two saws that I use. This is these are Japanese saws. I prefer the Japanese saws. The difference between a Japanese saw and an American saw, one of the many, is the Japanese saws cut on the pole, where American saws cut on the push. I prefer Japanese saws. This is a beautiful timber saw with a custom, I built this scabbard out of Douglas Fir, laminated. So I did a video on that. But this is a great saw, one that I really like for cutting big timbers. And then my big Japanese pole saw, hand saw, these gaukuchos. I'll try to put links if I can find them. This is a nice versatile saw because it has a ripping teeth and cross-cutting teeth, so you can cut any grain. But those are the two hand saws that I primarily use. Of course, I showed you my white forged laminated timber framing slick. Absolutely a treasure and so sharp. Look at that. Do you see the coloration? That's laminated steel. Soft steel up here for durability, hard tool steel on the end for edge retention. Isn't that magnificent? That is quite a thing to sharpen. I take quite good care of that. We'll get into how these things work in the future. The two timber framing chisels you're going to want are going to be a 2-inch and an 1.5 inches. Your 1.5 inches is going to be your bread and butter. A timber framing chisel is meant to be hit or struck. That's what makes it different than a regular chisel, which you're not supposed to pound on. Very thick, very robust, so you can beat on them. I built an entire 12x16 cabin with this, plus many other things on the original handle. A steel ring, often forged in the back to prevent the wood from splitting, but that's made in England, English steel, and an English oak, I believe, handle. Absolutely magnificent. I can't believe the abuse I put on that, and yet it's still going today. Today we'll be using our 1.5 inch, the bread and butter chisel. I always sharpen before I start every day, and I think the best way to go is the diamond blades, or the diamond stones, I guess you would call them. I built this little holder out of oak, and I've used so much fluid on it that it's kind of warped, but I don't know. I put an edge on it so I could push and it wouldn't slide around on the table. It's still going. So I've got a course. These are diamond impregnated super flat surfaces put on I guess that's just steel. Coarse, medium, and fine. When I sharpen my chisels, I use diesel or kerosene. And you start, depending on the condition, but you start by flattening the back. You always start with flattening the back first. Every chisel you get, unless it's very, very high end and someone's already done it, is not going to have a flat back. Not to be confused with Western white women. Shall we proceed? This is 12-inch spacing. This is 6 inches. That'll bring us, we need 30 at my thumb, right there. This is a tool that you should have, a skill saw of some sort, but you should know how to measure the blade offset from the table here. So if we're gonna cut, depending on which way we're gonna cut, but probably from the small end, we need to know what that distance is. And this, I know, is 1.5 inches. So what I'm saying is if we drop this 1.5 inches, we can use this as a guide for a nice clean cut. This is also an essential Proho item, a square. My dad, he had a test before he would hire a carpenter. When he was interviewing, he would say, go out into your truck and get your square and bring it here. And he was able to determine, in his opinion, what type of a carpenter the guy was, and if he even had one, which most guys didn't, by the condition of his square. My neighbor Travis I think that's him, is hauling cow manure to spread on another field, I believe. So we know our square is 2 inch, 1.5 inches. Before you put your tools away, especially anything that's raw metal, you want to put some protectant oil on. This is what I use. And then anything you touched with your skin, wherever you touch, it'll rust. So just wipe it down. Let's grab our layout tools and we'll put those screws in. Well, hello, friendly. All right, gentlemen. That takes care of that. Tomorrow morning, the electrician will be here with his crew, and they'll mount that 400 amp service. Mr. Jiraiya, what time is it? Do we have time for a water line? Shall we go for it?
I think so.
Let's go for it. All right, let's put in a frost-free hydrant.